be seated. I know in our midst we have many talented, committed, skilled teachers. You inspired me this week as I was composing this sermon, because we know that skilled teachers know students learn when they encounter an idea over time and in a variety of formats. Teacher may begin with an imaginative telling at first to lure someone in with creativity, only to then confound their students and honestly disrupt their tidy notions. To be left in a state of wonder feels uncomfortable, and that's what the teacher wants, because that's in a good and growing way. Since one lesson or story is never enough, a teacher repeats the idea over and over, so eventually students begin to recognize, grasp hold, and then apply the learning on their own terms. So many of you are, again, gifted educators, and so is Jesus in the Gospel of Luke. Once he sets his face towards Jerusalem, he tells a series of parables about the lost and the found, of a person's search for a lost coin, or one sheep that goes missing amongst the 99, or a wayward son and a father's desperate search for him. Jesus uses the absurd to describe the depth of God's love to persist in bringing us home. And framing these lost and found stories are the miracles that Jesus performs, the miracles of restoring sight to the blind. And those instances of healing have as much to do with the community finally recognizing that this formerly blind person is a beloved child of God, regardless of how the community might have labeled, ostracized, or condemned them. The miracle is that everybody is healed and everybody is reunited. So the lost are found, and those unable to see finally look upon one another with clarity. Just before we join Jesus on the dusty road going to Jerusalem, he has told a story, a parable of a Pharisee masquerading in righteousness while a tax collector cowers in humility. We might not wonder so much about that, but in that parable, he's literally flipping the script. Traditionally, a Pharisee epitomized righteousness, and tax collectors were the poster child for sinfulness. I just gave you almost every hint to decipher today's story. But before I read it, please pray with me. Dear God, week after week, we return to your holy word because we long to see you and we want to be found by you. Peel away the things that obstruct our sight and understanding, the opinions, the prejudices, the habits that keep us from your salvation. Speak to us through these ancient words that we live according to your word. Amen. I invite you to listen for God's living word as I read from the 19th chapter of the Gospel of Luke. Jesus enters Jericho and was passing through it. A man there named Zacchaeus, he was a chief tax collector and he was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not because he was short in stature. So Zacchaeus ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him because he was going to pass that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to Zacchaeus, "Zacchaeus, hurry down. I have come, and I must stay at your house today." So Zacchaeus hurried down and was happy to welcome Jesus. But all who saw it began to grumble and said, "Oof, he has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner." So Zacchaeus stood there. And Zacchaeus said to the Lord, "Look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much." Then Jesus said, "Oh, today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and save the lost." Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. There's a Hebrew story about the great patriarch Abraham, the father of three faith traditions. One day, Abraham sees a stranger walking in the distance, and the stranger looks weary from a long journey through the desert. The Bedouin culture of the ancient Near East prizes hospitality, regardless of who you are or were. Hospitality matters most, and it's what one human being offers to another human being to stay alive. It's the basis for humanity. So Abraham invites the traveler to dine with him and stay the night. The man readily agrees, but as Abraham is preparing to serve the meal, he discovers that his guest is, capital letters, all of them, a fire worshiper. Abraham's outraged by this, and he throws the man out of the house without so much as a morsel to eat. That night, God appears to Abraham in a dream and asks, "Why did you treat your guest so poorly?" But Abraham feels pride in saying, "Because he doesn't worship you, the one true God, my Lord. That's why I threw him into the night." And God replies, "Abraham, Abraham, I have loved that fire worshiper for 60 years, and you couldn't put up with him for just one night?" You're supposed to laugh at that, but no, it's really not funny, because the next word in the manuscript says, "ouch." Even though that fable exists outside of Hebrew scriptures, we find the ancient lesson throughout Hebrew scriptures and into the New Testament. At the very beginning of the book of Genesis, the genesis of our faith, it describes three strangers who approach Abram and Sarah's tent. This time, Abraham welcomes the three strangers because it's those three strangers who come bearing the divine promise that they will bear a son, despite the fact that Abram and Sarai couldn't possibly bear a son. That's the start of our faith: hospitality, welcoming the stranger. Our history keeps going with story after story of women who risk their lives for the Israelites. Some even marry into the family tree despite an undesirable pedigree. They might marry into the family tree, but we could probably imagine for the rest of their lives they still remain somewhat ostracized. Without Ruth, though, we wouldn't have King David. Without Ruth the Moabite, who is the epitome of loyalty and love, without Ruth, we would not have that strong family tree that begat Jesus' father, Joseph. All the stories and all of Scripture's litany of arcane names and genealogy teach us one thing. Sometimes the only way God is able to save our lives is by disrupting our prejudices about who is right, acceptable, or worthy. The Gospel of Luke puts us on notice early on that this is the message we're going to hear, because the writer embeds it in the preaching of John the Baptist. John the Baptist is famously known for his sermon that begins with, "Woe to you, you brood of vipers," as he warns the Israelites not to rely on being a part of Abraham's family for their salvation. John the Baptist confronts their propensity to measure someone's worth in God's eyes through their own prejudices and quick judgments, underestimating the other and overestimating themselves. John the Baptist is a fire and brimstone preacher, and he commands them to change their hearts and minds and start living in a way that reflects God's values and love. And that's the message Jesus grabs hold of and lives. So now we're at the end of the Gospel of Luke. And in the final days of Jesus' journey to Jerusalem, a crowd of spectators line the streets to catch a glimpse of him. Enter Zacchaeus, the wee little man. That's the song you learned in Sunday school. You're smiling, you know the song of the wee little man, Zacchaeus. It's a great song. In Jesus' final days, he's approaching Jerusalem, and the clock is ticking for him to drive home the fundamental lesson of the good news. Because once he's gone, He's depending upon us to carry on that teaching. The first thing to know about this encounter with Zacchaeus is that Jesus will again flip the script on what people presume to be right. The name Zacchaeus means righteous. How in the world could the chief tax collector walk around with a name like that? So we know that one thing. Zacchaeus then climbs a tree to see Jesus, and he puts himself on full display for all the crowd to see. It's a perfect position because the chief tax collector stands at the top of a pyramid scheme complicit with Rome to keep the Hebrew people in poverty. You see, he amasses his wealth by taxing, literally taking money from his neighbors' wallets, sending a portion to his employers in Rome, but only after keeping a healthy cut for himself. The bystanders who see him up in the tree very likely remember the times that he or one of his mafiosa thugs appeared at their door, taking the money needed to feed and clothe their families. So now we're only a couple of sentences into this story, but are we going to consider someone with the reputation of Tony Soprano or the leader of the Gambino crime family a righteous man? Next, the gospel writer tells us that he's rich. The Gospel of Luke writes more about money than any other gospel, but never consistently. Money is not the problem, nor is it ever a problem to be rich. Not in Luke, not in Acts of the Apostles, and not in the writings of Paul. The gospel's overall portrait never labels either money or wealth as evil. It's how we acquire, hoard, or use our wealth. And lastly, the gospel describes him as short. Short means a lot. To be short in Greco-Roman times, though, implies of limited stature, of limited regard. When you go back and read the story, know that he's short. So did he climb the tree to put himself on full display, intimidate the masses? Did he climb the tree because he was truly shorter than the others and he couldn't see? Or did he climb the tree because the crowd had shut them out because of their contempt for who he was? These little morsels now create a technicolor story when we, the readers, see Jesus encounter Zacchaeus. The people must have felt outrage, and in case we're confused, Luke minces no words, all who saw it began to grumble. They felt threatened by the way Jesus seeks out this man, a man who embodies every aspect of being a sinner in their minds. But unfazed, Zacchaeus clambers down the tree and is happy. He is happy to see Jesus, and he welcomes Jesus. Salvation is in this moment. And it's not because Zacchaeus says, "Oh, I'm a sinner, I'm so awful." In fact, the only talk of sin occurs amongst the crowd, the infamous "they say," or "some people," or "all" who masquerade anonymously. Salvation is when Zacchaeus turns out his pockets and places on the table all his power and privilege to settle any debts with a generosity that far exceeds any of the expected norms at the time. You see, Zacchaeus wants to be a part of this community that Jesus is building, and Zacchaeus will not let money, political allegiances, or privilege stand in his way. He's happy. We should imagine Jesus is happy too. He looks upon him and says, "This is a son of Abraham," for his willingness to make right, to become righteous in his dealings with everyone. So Jesus restores this lost man to the community, assuming the community's willing. But Jesus says this man is righteous and belongs here. And Jesus says for all willing to hear, this is what salvation looks like. It's a simple story. Zacchaeus goes out on a limb to seek Jesus, and Jesus goes out on a limb to seek after him. what happens next and what happens for the crowd remains unstated. Did he resign his profession? Is it possible to be an agent of the Roman government and be good? Did anyone join them for dinner that night? Zacchaeus is rich, he's got a great house, he's going to throw a party for everybody. Did anybody bother to go? The what happens next question is really directed at us. And it's really the final exam question of this gospel. Will we allow ourselves to see, to seek, and to be found? Have we learned to let go of our prejudices and our judgments? Can we finally see Jesus for who he is? He never succumbs to our perceived notions of acceptability, but he raises us up to his level. So can we go out on a limb and look with the eyes of grace to see, really see that other person we've long confined to some category that lets us keep them at a safe distance? And once we've seen them as someone and not just something, will we allow ourselves to be seen at the same time? Perhaps take a risk to dine with them. You can't argue over a meal. You shouldn't argue over a meal. Maybe take a risk and dine with them. Maybe share our common humanity before we delve into polarizing topics. This charming little story of the wee little man is happy because Jesus wants us to be happy. And this charming little story of Zacchaeus as a wee little man carries an urgent plea. Don't get caught up in measuring someone's worth, and in the process, keep ourselves from enjoying salvation. There's a cost to believing in a God who seeks out and loves those whom we see as the enemy, contemptible, less than, or if we're really honest, might say is our enemy. It's the same cost to follow Jesus, because we got to let go of all of that. And when we let go of all of that is when we are invited to taste the heavenly joy right now, because Jesus wants us at his ever-expanding table. May it be so, my friends.